Trade. In the past, most people grew or hunted their own food. They made their own clothing. They built their own homes. In short, people did nearly everything for themselves. Today, however, most people depend on others to supply the goods and services they need. Our world is interdependent. Interdependent means that we rely on each other. That is, people and countries depend on one another for goods and services. Trade is an important part of that. Trade and geography. To get the products we need and want, we engage in trade. Trade is the exchange of goods and services in a market. So we no longer just trade within the states, but we trade with other countries. A lot of our goods might come from China, so that's trade, international trade. When individuals engage in trade, they do so because they gain from that trade. In other words, trade benefits both the buyer and the seller. So when we trade with China, they get money from the United States. Maybe United States companies buy car parts, and then they bring them to the US and they put them together and sell them in the US, where we have a market where lots of people can afford to buy. Geographic location can give a country or region advantages in trade. For example, a region that is close to an ocean can more easily ship goods overseas. China has very important ports that can go across the Pacific Ocean with ships, and ships can carry more goods than in a truck or on a train. On the other hand, a manufacturing plant located far away from a market will need to add transportation cost to its products, making them higher in price. So if we make something in the United States, in theory, it would be cheaper because it doesn't have to ship across and pay for the fuel and the shipping across the Pacific Ocean from China. Types of trade. All of the buying and selling that takes place within a country is known as domestic trade. Domestic trade involves producers and consumers located inside the same country. So domestic is within your own country. Domestic producers and consumers can also engage in international trade. International is between nations. Each country is a nation, so international is between different countries. International trade, or trade with foreign, which means a different country, foreign producers and consumers. International trade involves exports and imports. These are type of products. Exports are goods and services produced within a country and they exit. They are sold outside of the country's border. So if you think of export, exit. They exit our country to be sold. So if we made something here and sold it in Germany, that's an export from the United States. It left our country to be sold. Imports are goods and services sold in a country that are produced in other countries. Imports come into our country. So when we get goods from China, they are imports into the United States. They come into our country, into the United States. That's imports. International trade between countries requires a system for exchanging types of currency. China doesn't use the US dollar, so there has to be an exchange of currency, what our dollar is worth to their dollar or their money that they use. Trade barriers and free trade. If imported goods are cheaper than domestic goods would be products made within the US, imported are made in another country and they come in, consumers will usually buy more of them. These lower prices can harm domestic producers. They can hurt the factories in the US if our prices are higher by reducing their sales. Governments sometimes try to protect domestic producers through tariffs. A tariff is an extra tax on imports, imported goods, or exports. Tariffs are an example of a trade barrier. We used to have tariffs on them, and then the tariff money, an extra tax when products were coming in from Japan or from China, our customs, the border agents, that when they would come into our country, would check them more carefully. We could hire more customs agents to check carefully and have more regulation over the products because we had that extra tax. A trade barrier is a government policy or restriction that limits international trade. And that also helped make foreign products more expensive so that people would buy the United States, and it kept American workers working. However, today, many countries are working towards free trade. In the late 1990s, we started to sign free trade agreements with the idea that we would be able to sell our products and that more other countries' economies would grow to where they could buy American products. That's not how it ended up working as much, and it has hurt some of our US companies and made foreign products much cheaper because they pay much lower wages than what we can pay, than our products made in the US. We pay our workers fair wages, so our prices are higher. Today, many countries are working toward free trade or the removal of trade barriers. Free trade gives consumers lower prices and more choices. However, domestic producers can suffer if consumers prefer cheaper imported goods. Make sure you look at the diagram. So, goods exported from China to the United States means they exit China and come into, so they would be imports in the United States. Goods exported from the US sometimes are exported and they're imports in China. They go to the China to be used. So you can see the amounts there on that diagram. Make sure that you read and look at the pictures carefully. And look at that container ship, such as the ones in this photo carry most. Each of these are like the back of a semi-truck, and they will have thousands and thousands on these ships. And they come to ports in Los Angeles and California on the West Coast, and then they are just cranes take them off these ships, and they're heavy. They're full of electronics, cell phones, stereos, different appliances, parts that will go to car factories, and they lift them with a crane and they put them onto different transportation. Sometimes they go through the Panama Canal to come to East Coast cities as well.